my loves, welcome back to Event Tea at the Picnic Yard, where we discuss everything intimate event, hosting, styling, decor, dining, hospitality, and the entire shebang. So let's get into it. On our last episode of Event Tea at the Picnic Yard, we're talking about how stunning intimate designs and setup don't just happen by chance, how they follow certain principles and event design or design language or language of aesthetics. But this week we're going to now narrow it down. We're going to be talking about the elements or the principles that create what we call visual interest. So what are the things that makes a setup eye-catching, that makes it interesting to your eyes, or that your mind reads it as interesting? So we're going to be talking about contrast, we're going to be talking about pattern, we're going to be talking about texture, and then focal point or accent. Let's get sipping. We're going to be starting with contrast. When you hear the word contrast, what really comes to mind? So for me, when I hear contrast or when I talk of contrast, what comes to mind is comparison. So contrast is basically when two elements are put together or combined in such a way that each element is allowed to shine. Um, so, and what do I use for an example right now? Uh-huh. Let's use this flower for example. This color of the inside of this flower on the outside are combined in such a way. So it's combined in such a way that this color inside here contrasts with the white. I think this dark brownish color contrasts with the white in such a way that this white shows to be very bright and then the dark color shows to be very dark. So this is how contrast works. So when you're creating a stunning event design and setup, one of the things you have to consider when you're applying colors is whether you want these colors to be complementary or you want them to contrast. So this is what makes your layering in your styling to be very, very obvious when there is a stark contrast between elements. So in the absence of contrast, everything blends in together and your design is going to look very, very flat. So contrast creates a visual interest in such a way that it allows each element of your setup to stand out without one dominating the other. So everything gets an opportunity to shine in its own way, even when it's being combined with others. So just like these flowers that are here, the white flowers are able to stand out, you're able to see them well as white flowers, while the burgundy roses are able to also show up as burgundy roses. So the contrast in the colors makes these flowers now look not flat. So if these were all white flowers of the same texture, the same shape, or even the same kind of flowers, this is going to look very, very flat. So that is one thing that contrast does for us. Another thing again that contrast does when it comes to styling is that it makes layering very, very obvious because you're now able to tell each layer apart from the other. So say for example, you're trying to do a place set. When you use a dark charger plate, and you want the dinner plate to show very well, you're going to pick up a bright plate that contrasts with the color of the charger plate. So you keep layering in contrast like that, which creates the visual interest that makes that thing look really, really classy. But if you did something where all the colors were flat and they blended too much into each other, your setup is not going to look interesting. So it could be the same color palettes that you're using, but how you stack them to arrange them is what creates the visual interest and allows the contrast to do its thing. So moving on to the next thing, we're talking about pattern. So patterns, one thing pattern does for your event or for your design and styling is that patterns are what tells the story. They reinforce your event theme. If you say this is the event theme, that repetitive thing that you keep putting in your design and your setup that reinforces the story of the theme, that is a pattern. Patterns make your setup look intentional. It removes the randomness of of design. So pattern is what nails your design down and makes it look like intentional. Like this person looked at this thing and was trying to create this particular image and kept putting in these particular items or these particular elements in order to create this visual image and to tell this visual story. So that is what patterns do for your event styling. It removes the randomness and makes it look very, very intentional. So next we have texture. I would say texture is like the tactile experience of your event setup. So you may not be able to touch everything in your event design or setup, but the texture of each element of your design creates a feeling. Some items come off looking really soft, some look hard, some of them look very dainty, some items look rustic, some items they look very romantic, some items they look intense. So that is how texture works. So there are different kinds of textures we're talking about. Say for example, the free flowing fabric that you use for your drapery, the elegance and the softness of fresh flowers, the shiny and glossy look of glass and polished cutleries. All of these are different textures that you find in your setup. So when you're creating an event design and you want to create visual interest, you look for ways to combine textures in such a way that it is non-linear. So you contrast the textures that you're using something that is hard against something that is soft, something very textured against something very smooth. Like say for example, if you're working with smooth flower vases, you could go for textures, your glassware style, glassware that have texture, so that the texture of your cup kind of contrasts with that of another glass piece that is on your table, which is your floral, which is your vase. So what texture does for your design is it makes it look more dimensional. It creates depth and dimension to your design. In the absence of texture, design is going to look flat. So remember this whole thing, we're trying to talk about what creates visual interest. So say for example, now if you're working with colors and you're not working with different colors, what you're going to try to infuse in that monochromatic design that you're working with is to ensure that the textures are contrasting in such a way that the smoothness of one thing allows the roughness of the other to shine and stand out. So not just only contrasting, but in a way that both of them come together to create a kind of a sense of harmony. So the final element or principle we're going to be talking about today is accent or focal points. So what's an accent, or what's an accent piece in your design? An accent piece in your design is that thing that doesn't naturally follow the pattern of your entire design, but it kind of gives your design like a focal point, something to look at, something that is striking, but somehow ties your entire design together. It could be an accent color, it could be an item that is distinct from everything in your design and styling. It could be an antique piece that you add to your setup. It could be like a very bright color, maybe like a chromatic color or something along the neon tones that kind of stands out in such a way that it does not clash with every other thing in the design, but it attracts attention and holds attention. Exactly. So when it comes to creating design, when you have repeated pattern, you've been able to create contrast, and you have worked on your textures in such a way that you have created visual harmony. Now you want to put something in your design that each time, that is what people will remember specifically in your design, which is what holds their mind's interest. That thing, that element is called an accent piece. So now that we've explored the elements that create visual interest in your design, I want you to do something for me. The next time you see an event design, either you're scrolling through Instagram or you're at a venue, I need you to spot the contrast. I need you to recognize the patterns. I need you to realize to recognize the textures that are in that setup, and then identify what is the accent piece. And if you see any of those, you can drop that in the comment section. Even in this setup now that I'm using for this content, if you can identify what is the pattern, you can decide what is the accent, and then what is creating contrast in this place, or the things that are contrasting, leave it in the comment section. Next week we're going to be exploring things that create visual harmony in event design and styling. And until then, grab a cup of tea, stay subscribed, and let's keep spilling event tea. Okay, bye.